Okay, so in this interview with Brad Olsen, we wanted to talk to someone who had just actually been to Antarctica to try and find out, is there any truth to some of the claims that are being made out there about the things like pyramids, the different crafts beneath the ice, the study of, the alleged sort of down crafts and pre-civilizations, the pre-Adamites that had been there. Is there evidence of that stuff yet? Finding the truth on some of these different things is a huge part of actually allowing the mind of others to, when we can show evidence, when we can show proof of it, it allows the mind to give permission to expand, because it's like, wow, this stuff is real. So in our conversation with Brad here, we go through what he found about a lot of these different anomalies in Antarctica in terms of evidence. So enjoy this interview, and we'll catch you at the end with a few extra little tidbits that we kind of noticed as we went through the entire interview. Okay, so why don't we first start with a little bit of like a background, an introduction of who you are and your work up to this point.
Well, my name is Brad Olsen. I'm author of 9 books, including 2 in the esoteric series, that is Modern Esoteric, Beyond Our Senses, and Future Esoteric, The Unseen Realms. Currently working on the 3rd and final volume called Beyond Esoteric, The Ultimate Journey. Since I never repeat my subject matter, I'm taking a little time to get to 2020. I think is going to be one of those pivotal years like 2012 or Y2K, where a lot of things seem to be coming to the fore. So I've been waiting to put this book out to see what happens with many things that are going on in the world. I've just come back from 4 months in South America, including 3.5 weeks in Antarctica. So my lecture series for 2019 is The Mysteries of South America and the Anomalies of Antarctica.
So it sounds like you've been in the space for quite a while. What total number of years have you been researching and working in this space?
About 25 years now. I started CCC Publishing in 1995, so just a couple months away from our 25th year anniversary.
Nice. And what can you say about sort of like the difference of 25 years ago, then 15 years ago, and now, and really looking at what's happening, how many people are interested, like what kind of differences can you touch on there?
Sure. Well, I started as a travel writer. I did my own self-financed trip around the world for 3 years. Gave me a wonderful perspective on the world. My first book, called World Stompers: A Global Travel Manifesto, is in its 5th edition and still in print, still selling. And it was I call it the golden age of travel. In the middle 90s, Americans weren't so divisive around the world. We could travel just about anywhere, including many Middle Eastern countries, which are certainly off limits now. And during the era of Bill Clinton, it was kind of this peaceful age in America and with America around the world. Of course, everything changed after Y2K. And around that time, after 9/11, you also had the advent of the internet. And the internet really was a blow to the travel publishing industry, because all of a sudden you could find just about any information you wanted online. So although I'm still working on my Sacred Places series of books and traveling quite a bit, I started thinking maybe I should pivot into something else. And what really interests me were these esoteric subjects, which also include UFOs, extraterrestrials, exopolitics, and who we are as humans in this world and where we're going. So it was an accumulation of traveling and then finding some of these sites. So, for example, the Great Pyramids that have a much bigger story to tell than, say, just the write-up that I was giving it in my Sacred Place Around the World book, for example. And then so when I developed the esoteric series, I started getting into more detail about the finer aspects of why these monuments are so spectacular. And then also finding antediluvian civilizations around the world and realizing that there's a much bigger picture than what we were told in school. And certainly the controllers have done a wonderful job editing out anything that would suggest that there were some advanced civilizations that once existed on this planet.
Right, right. And that's going to dive sort of into the topic of even today with Antarctica, because, there's a lot. I mean, it seems as though there's a lot happening with Antarctica. As of even, we'll say even 2 years ago, I think a lot of murmurs within mainstream media and so forth were starting to come forth of, hey, we kind of found like a warm region underneath. We're starting to see a little bit of plant life. And these little tidbits started to almost prepare for this deeper conversation, which I people like yourself and others out there who are looking into this more deeply, there's probably a lot under that ice that we haven't really been told. So you recently went to Antarctica. First of all, before you get into what happened with the trip, what was the inspiration? Why did you want to go and see it for yourself?
Well, sometimes when life gives you lemons, you have to make lemonade. And about 1 year ago, I had just been given a no-fault eviction. I always paid my rent on time and was always good with the landlord, but the building sold and I was rent control in San Francisco. And so the new owner basically gave me my marching orders, which was an owner move-in. And so I had to put all my stuff in storage where it remains to this day. And I wanted to buy a house in Lake Tahoe, and I still do. So when I got up there right after I left, and I did get a nice settlement, that the house that I had my eye on just went into escrow. And I thought, well, universe must be telling me something here. Maybe I should go travel again. And the two continents that I hadn't been to yet was South America and Antarctica. So with the money I'd saved up and this settlement, and with my girlfriend, Emily, she came with me for the 4 months, and we set off. And it was an adventure because I bought a vehicle down there in Santiago and owned a big SUV that was already built out with a kitchen and that pulls out. And he got it in Quebec, Canada, this guy who I bought it from. Drove it 15 months all the way through Central America, sold it to me in Santiago. I drove it all the way, well, first up to Peru and Bolivia. I met with Nassim Harriman and Brian Forrester. Were doing a big trip, and I was a guest speaker on that trip as well. So we got to do all the sacred places of Peru and Bolivia. Then that trip split, and then we took off for the Southlands, and then through very fortuitous events, got on a sailboat with only 14 people to Antarctica. And we were down there for 3.5 weeks. And then just to wrap up the trip, it was only 1 month ago. We were having our wrap-up dinner with the crew and saying goodbye. And then I drove up through southern Patagonia to Torre del Pines, Petit Moreno Glacier. And then it was in El Chetlan. We were hiking around Mount Fitzroy. Somebody recognized the vehicle in town and flashed me a wad of cash and said, "Hey, I want to buy it off you." And so it worked out that I sold the vehicle for $500 more than I bought it for. So that worked out. Nice. And then it just went back into backpacker mode. And then we went to Uruguay for about a week and then just flew out 2 weeks ago. I'm really just fresh back from that trip now.
Nice. Nice. And one of the questions that even came through when we were talking about like, oh yeah, we're going to interview Brad and, we're going to talk about some Antarctica stuff and was like the process of getting to Antarctica. I understand that there's different, you can go as more of a tourist and in that particular case, you're sort of, you can't go to as many areas as if you were to go under a different sort of, level of permission. I'm not sure how that works. Can you touch on how that works?
Sure. Well, we've heard so many things about Antarctica, so many stories about pyramids and antediluvian civilizations and giant disks under the ice. So it was really my intention to look into some of these claims. And I started before I even left. And when I met the captain who would eventually sail us down there, he invited us to a party on New Year's Eve with all the captains that go to Antarctica. If they were there on New Year's Eve, they were at this party. So I spoke to a half a dozen. And this is when I started to realize not many people know anything about this stuff. And I'm going to be speaking on this at all the conferences, and I'm going to be on a panel with Linda Moulton Howe, Emery Smith, and Dr. Sala at Contacting the Desert. I might have to be the one that says, I tried as hard as I could to find out about some of this stuff, and nobody knows. So it started with the captains. And then when we got down there, every single research station I went to, which was 6 in total, I asked every single person I could if they knew anything about it. They didn't know about the disc. They didn't know about the pyramids, although one expedition team said that it's just what they call a nunatak, which is just a rock formation that comes out of the ice. But I did get some information that is interesting. And one researcher, he was a marine biologist at a Argentinian station called Brown. He said that there was a sighting at another Argentinian base about a month before, and they did see some orbs and discs flying in irregular patterns and at very high speeds. And it was sort of the banter between the stations. And then when I was pressing him if he knew anything about a UFO under the ice or anything of an extraterrestrial nature, then he was like, well, I can tell you this. And that was basically all he said, is that some of his colleagues had a sighting. And I also know that for a fact, there is a large area near the South Pole that is a no-fly zone that absolutely nobody can cross over on land or fly into. Now, what's interesting about that is the rumored zone where Admiral Byrd flew over and said he saw a massive opening in the ice, so big that he could fly his plane into, around once he was in it, and then out of. So it's interesting that there would be a no-fly zone. And I was just on Beyond Belief with George Norrie yesterday in Boulder, Colorado. And I told him this story, and George's like, why do they need a no-fly zone in Antarctica? It's the South Pole. Nobody goes there. And he's got a point. Nobody does go there.
Yeah.
So what's the point of making it a no-fly zone if you only get a couple visitors only in the summer? Right about now, Joe, the whole network of traveling there and tourism is absolutely shutting down for about 8 months. And then you will not be able to go there until middle November next year, or at the end of this year.
So, I think you're referring to that picture, and I think we discussed it a little bit beforehand, where, you see the ice and you see the ship sort of beneath the ice. And is that the, because we've looked into that for a while. It's very difficult, like you said, to kind of put any stake to the claims. Is that area that you're referring to, the no-fly zone, is that where it's rumored that potentially that even could be, or are we specifically just talking about the, the alleged hole that Admiral Byrd flew into?
I think it's the alleged hole, and I've seen it on other maps of people that are kind of marking out where some anomalous features of Antarctica were. I have not gotten a GPS coordinates. I've not seen this giant craft on Google Earth, but I do know that they do mask out certain areas. And I have a slide in my presentation where they got a little sloppy and put the screen right over some mountains, and then everything is a different color white. So there are areas that are definitely being covered up. But then there are some areas that they just maybe don't care about. And there's one area which is in the New Schwabenland area that was claimed by Nazi Germany. And it turns out that West Germany and now unified Germany still has a base inland, and it's called the Conan Base. And you can look on Google Earth right now and you'll see all these, it just looks like posts or something sticking out of the ice, and it's drifting snow around it. But if you go back to 2013, you can see this massive machine-like structure that's buried in the ice. So that's location number one. Location number two is the Beardmore Glacier. And this is where Linda Moulton Howe has been talking to insider named Spartan 1 and Spartan 2 about doing an expedition to this massive craft in the Beardmore Glacier. Now, the Beardmore Glacier is very south facing. It's probably at about the 85 degrees south latitude, the South Pole being 90. So it's really, really south. And when Spartan 1 said that he went there on a mission in August. I thought, rookie mistake. He was thinking, August, you'd go to our Arctic Circle, but you wouldn't go to Beardmore Glacier. Why? It's close to 24 hours of darkness that time of year. So the other location that I've been able to pinpoint basically through the Fitbit data dump, and that was about a year ago when Fitbit and Strava, these workout apps that you can wear and also monitor your exercise, came out with a lot of locations around the world. All we really heard about in the news media is that, now the soldiers who go jogging out of the Kandahar base, they'll be targets for terrorists. But they didn't talk about was the Fitbit data in Antarctica, which showed a lot of people going to very inaccessible locations. And so my third possible location for the disk is the Union Glacier. And I do know that one of the outfitters that goes down there has a little way station there. But where the Fitbit data was up and over a mountain ridge. So it could be they're going there to explore, but they wouldn't admit that to me when I met them in Puentes Arenas at their office. And I'm going to their other office here in Salt Lake City on Friday for a follow-up. So maybe I'll get some more information on some of this stuff. But these guys do the logistics and the mapping for the entire continent. And they were kind of saying, we can't help you with these locations. We don't know anything about it.
Right. And did you get a sense that they were perhaps just kind of, don't ask these questions? Or did you genuinely feel they didn't know?
Since it was only via email with the logistics guy, I couldn't read his facial expressions or hear his voice. So it would be hard for me to judge. But I sent him a lot of the images that I sent you. And one of them shows a double helicopter propeller. I think they're called Hueys. And he said that there wouldn't be any of those in Antarctica. So he was kind of suggesting maybe that disk is Greenland or possibly Alaska, where there are glacier fields. And even possibly even southern Patagonia, which is the third largest ice field in the world after Antarctica and Greenland. But he pretty much dismissed all that via email. Again, I couldn't tell if he was being facetious or didn't want to tell me anything. That's why I like to do face-to-face meetings. Right. I can usually gauge a person's expressions a little better and see if they're rolling their eyes or something like that. Of course, you can't tell when you do that on email.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. And so, I guess what did you find that in your travels that you found was like, oh yeah, there's a pretty interesting anomaly here, or this is sort of backed up by at least some level of truth?
Sure. Well, and that is how I start my talk. I will talk about very established science, and there are some very interesting things that are happening down there. And then the second half of my talk, I'll say, we can only speculate that these things exist. I couldn't come up with any corroborating evidence, witnesses, photos, videos myself. But it's interesting that you could see these things on Google Earth, for example, and that people do go out to these very inhospitable locations, including many elite in 2016.
Right.
And around then, you had Prince Harry going out on a cross-country trip. You had John Kerry there on Election Day. You had Patriarch Kirill of Moscow, Newt Gingrich and his wife is the ambassador to the Vatican. So there is this tie-in we call the Illuminati Disneyland, and why these people are going down there is a big mystery. But and Buzz Aldrin, and he tweeted about seeing something evil and we're all in danger, and then it quickly came down. So you get like these little tidbits, Joe. You get these little quippets of what could possibly be there. And sometimes it comes together into a greater picture, but really they're kind of just out there like stars in the sky and little independent. So when I start out with scientific information, I talk about how Antarctica is a wonderful place to capture meteorites because it's just a giant tableau of the white polar plateau. And when they come down, they just will sit on top of the ice and can be located. I'll talk about the dinosaurs that once existed in Antarctica, including several species that are unique to that continent alone. When Shackleton and Scott were making their attempts to go to the South Pole, they went to the Beardmore Glacier, and just up above it is a mountain not too far away from the South Pole that has ferns as fossils and even some of these dinosaur bones. So it's an incredible repository for things that have just existed for a long time, because East Antarctica is one of the oldest land masses in the world. Over 3 billion years old, it has been a continent, which of course broke off from Pangaea or Gondwanaland and moved down to this position. Then West Antarctica, where I visited, which is the Palmer Peninsula that sticks out with South America just above it, that's only 700 million years old, and it only broke off from Antarctica about 70, 80 million years ago. So that's why it's so dramatic. You get these mountains that just soar straight up out of the water with glaciers in between, and it's quite a dramatic scene. And that's where about 95% of all visitors that go to Antarctica only will go to the Palmer Peninsula. So a lot of interesting other science, such as the southern lights that you can see, the ice fish that live in sub-Antarctic water, like below freezing water, that have no hemoglobin in their blood, that have white or clear blood. And the Southern Ocean, which surrounds Antarctica, is one of the richest oceans with krill and fish and all sorts of sea life. So when we went down there, the animals are not afraid of humans at all. You can just go right up alongside an iceberg with a great big leopard seal that eats penguins. The penguins themselves aren't afraid either. You can come right up almost face to face with them and take their picture. Whales one time went under our boat. And dolphins, not quite in Antarctica, but when we were leaving southern Argentina, were following us along in the Beagle Channel, and then also near Cape Horn. So the natural scenery and the wildlife is truly spectacular. In many ways, it's otherworldly. In fact, they even practice maneuvers with the Mars lunar rover in the dry valleys of Antarctica, which are one of the driest places on Earth, and cold and really inhospitable as the surface of Mars would be. So it has this otherworldly feeling of just being like on another planet when you go down there.
Interesting. Yeah, I can only imagine. It's interesting to think that, you know, when you look at the average world out there that you're just kind of experiencing on a daily basis, and then to think on the same planet you can be in a area that feels otherworldly would almost be like an interesting sort of shock in itself to some extent. But one thing I did want to ask, I mean, I spoke to Corey Good about on this particular subject maybe about a year and a half ago or so, and he was talking about how that he had speculated or had heard that there was a group of university researchers down there at various points, and there were certain bits of access that people were getting access to you know, explore some of what they're calling the pre-Adamite civilization that might be down there, you know, the lost civilization that they're going to potentially disclose on humanity. Have you looked into that in your research, or was there any sense of any of that when we went down there?
Oh, absolutely. I tried, and I know Corey Good as well. I've met him a few times and sat in on an interview with Linda Moulton Howe at the first Contact in the Desert I was at. Yeah, he has these stories of several bases under the ice, and conceivably they could exist. Antarctica is the most geoactive volcanic continent in the world with 92 active volcanoes, and we actually went and visited and saw some of them. And it's conceivable that they could create these large cavernous zones under the ice that wouldn't be picked up on satellite or drone or Google Earth. So Corey's only provided illustrations of these pre-Adamites. I'm very well aware of it, and I have a pretty good idea where he was describing them to be, and it's very inaccessible to go there. And this is not only part of the problem that for researchers like myself would have, because since there's so few people that ever go to Antarctica, and I crunched the numbers, Joe, I found the annual visitor total for the last few decades when tourism began and divided it by the number of people that are alive in the world today. And it's really about 1% of 1% of all living people in the world have even been there. And then when you consider that 95% of those people only go to the Palmer Peninsula region, there's no way to verify this stuff. And that's a problem I have. If nobody is coming back with photos or videos, they're just telling a tale to Linda Moulton Howe or David Wilcock or Corey Good, and they're just doing illustrations. It's like, well, that's a good story and all, but I need something a little bit more. And this is based on me talking to several dozen researchers, ship captains, navigators, people who, for their profession, explore Antarctica, and they were coming back with like a big nothing burger for me. So I kind of have to wonder if somebody just wants a little notoriety, they might tell a big story about going to some craft in the Beardmore Glacier in August when it's almost impossible to go there at that time of year.
Right, and that comes back to this sort of desire within this community, within this space of whether you want to call it the UFO community or people interested in disclosure, whatever it may be, this desire for really sort of high quality, verifiable journalism, and people have picked on different people at various points, and I can totally understand why, but it's like, this idea that we're not going to get it from the mainstream, right? Because if it is in fact true, we all know what the mainstream media really is in terms of just controlled information from the elite. How can this community come together and really get this stuff to happen in a good way? And it kind of leads to this bigger question of like, okay, some of this Antarctic stuff, right? I mean, if Corey Good's testimony of what he has heard from his alleged insider access to the secret space program, if that information is correct, then great. But what does all of this stuff, and I'd love your opinion on this here. It's like, what does this mean for humanity to be exploring some of these claims in Antarctica, and what could potentially be there? What's the significance in your opinion?
The significance can be, if this really plays out, if these stories and reports of giant UFOs under the ice, or even some of these bases where maybe this technology could be hidden away and worked on, if it plays out and it's real, it's about as big as any kind of disclosure moment we could have. I mean, it would certainly redefine our role as humans in this world and give us a bigger picture to talk about. Now, the problem is we're only given illustrations and drawings for the most part through Corey Good. I have not seen any photos or video evidence. It's almost like, Joe, let's say, hey, I see a UFO. Oh my God, here, let me draw you a picture. This is what it looked like. You'd be like, hey, you're a great illustrator and all, but tell you what, next time get your iPhone and take a picture and capture a video. So that's the problem I have, and that is the problem I ran into, is unless we have some hard evidence for this stuff, and I do have some images, and including some Google Earth stuff that's quite compelling, but we all know that there are Photoshop geniuses out there that can whip something up that looks very, very real, and I just don't want to be someone who falls for it. I'm kind of like that poster. I want to believe, but I need something more to make me believe this. And look, nobody wanted this to be more real than me. I spent a lot of money and time and effort to get down there to check this out. And unfortunately, I can't come back and say that I know for sure it even exists, because the professionals that I talked to, maybe they didn't want to talk about it. But my impression was, at least the ones that I met face to face, were just like, you're chasing up the wrong tree here, because there's nothing there. And I knew it was this one guy who's been going down there for over 20 years, I talked to him for a long time at this New Year's Eve party, and he's been to New Schwabenland. And I was asking about the underground bases. Hey, they could conceivably be there, because I do have maps of what Antarctica would look like without the ice. And there is a massive channel that goes in through that New Schwabenland region that conceivably you can get a U-boat way deep into the continent there. How would you know that exploring the surface? You wouldn't. And he went there. He's like, oh yeah, I love conspiracy theories, but I went there. I was just trying to find one of those darts that they drop with the swastika on it and couldn't find it. And so here's somebody who's been there, and he's like, you want to see something really cool that's real? And he showed me this picture of a seal that was in one of the dry valleys that's 3,000 years old. And he said, this is the most photographed seal of the world in the world. This is 1,000 years older than Jesus Christ, and it is freeze-dried, frozen in the dry valley. And so this kind of thing is what people would lead me to say, hey, you want to talk about something interesting or anomalous? Let's keep it with science. Let's talk about how penguin colonies are migrating, growing in size. Some are shrinking. The ice in Palmer is actually retreating very quickly. But conversely, there's other parts of Antarctica that are growing in ice. And on my way back, Joe, I had a 12-hour layover in Miami Beach. I went down to the beach. There's no sign of sea level rise down there. And this is one of those places that would be affected the most. So somehow Mother Nature kind of has a way to balance itself out, at least in Antarctica.
Absolutely. I think when it comes to unfortunately the word climate change is now very loaded, but when it comes to the global warming, the CO2, the effect in the atmosphere, I've been on that one for about 10 years, and it was an odd experience, because when I first came upon the research, read it, went through it, I said to myself, like, okay, this is not correct. Like, what we're being told from a political sense is not correct. It doesn't match any of the science. And then you just start going through it. And it's interesting now that more and more respected individuals are speaking out about the fact that it doesn't seem to be the case in the models into which we base all of our climate change on is proven worse and worse and more false and false as every year that goes by. So, that's kind of an interesting thing to look at there. And it's interesting to hear that story of how, like you said, Mother Nature kind of works things out, or maybe things just don't align with much of what we're told. But one interesting thing that I wanted to sort of ask you about too is, because I find this fascinating within this space. At Collective Evolution, we're always trying to be sort of this voice of reason within the space, being very grounded. We're not trying to give credence to any old theory that comes up. Let's study it, let's look at it, let's see what's there, because if our position has always been, if we're going to get this stuff into the mainstream and get people to really understand it, it's got to be credible and it's got to be backed up as best as we can. And some people in the community, they would hear what you're saying and they would go like, you sound like controlled disclosure going or you're trying to hold back the facts. Like maybe you did know something and you're just holding it back. What's your sort of a thought of that mindset within this alternative space, where as soon as something doesn't match the narrative, well, it must be controlled, even though the narrative was never backed up to begin with?
Well, I'm in a very unique position because I own my own businesses and I'm self-financing everything I do, and all I want to do is seek the truth.
Right.
And unfortunately, I have to come back. And I say unfortunately because I wanted to come back with a big story. I wanted to come back with footage of this. In no way am I trying to control the narrative at all. And in fact, if anything, what I'm trying to do is just calm people down a little bit and say, hey, look, we have to wait until we get some really good video or photo evidence of this stuff. Because just saying, hey, I'm a Navy SEAL and I went to the Beardmore Glacier in August and rescued someone in the pitch black darkness doesn't mean it really happened. I mean, I know good storytellers myself, and this is what kind of muddles the water, and this is what makes legitimate researchers look kind of kooky, because you do get people that spin yarns, and we have to understand that in this field where the mainstream media rarely touches these stories, the alternative media is quick to jump in on this. And oftentimes, if someone's a good storyteller, they can get themselves on a lot of channels and be seen, and all of a sudden may seem like their life is worth something again. Because we've heard a lot about PTSD, guys coming out of the military and taking their own lives and stuff because they're depressed. Well, hey, maybe I can just call up one of these people and tell them I went to Antarctica and found a big disc under the ice, and I don't have to show them a picture or anything. I'll just tell them a story. And unfortunately, some of my colleagues just go for this hook, line, and sinker. And I'm just saying, let's take a step back. Let's look at what they're coming up with. And if they're having any inconsistencies in their stories, well, that might be a red flag to say this could just be a good storyteller. I don't think I'm controlled narrative. I want this information out. And if people want to check out my books, you'll see I'm very open with this information in my esoteric series of books. And I want these hidden subjects to come to the fore. And this is the great awakening in humanity. And if I can play a small role in that, then I'm happy to do that. But at the same time, I want to be realistic about it too. And I don't ever want to give out information that I don't feel like I could support through my own research or findings. All we can say is this is speculative. It is thought that there is this thing in the ice. It is, some photos have come out of it, but until you have someone with their own camera saying, here's me, here's a selfie, here's a timestamp, here it is, now let's go walk into it, which would be very, very difficult to fake that kind of footage. All we have are some still images of this 3-mile disc in the ice. And look, I'm doing a talk in front of hundreds of people in the coming months here and being on panels, and I have to be accountable. And if I have to be the guy who throws a bucket of cold water on these people and say, you got to come up with something real and evidence form, then that's what I'm going to have to be. And it's not what I wanted to be. I wanted to be the guy that says, here's my video walking into this disc.
Yeah.
But couldn't make that happen this time around. But now I know the logistics groups that fly down there and do these kind of trips. So if there is a serious investor out there, I can make this happen if we can find the real GPS coordinates and do it. But one thing that I was led astray on was the idea that you have to get military clearance to go to this UFO site. And I was led to the Palmer Base, which is an American station. It's a research facility funded by the National Science Foundation. And I was led to go there to find the general, to get clearance to go to the disc. Joe, it was a big wild goose chase. There was no general. They knew nothing about the disc. And the guy even said, look, yeah, I've seen these. I watch these videos about Antarctica all the time. And there were supposed to be tanks down in McMurdo, the other American base. He's like, no, I've been there. They're just some Caterpillar plows that are under the snow, and maybe when you look at them overhead, they look like tanks. So things can be misconstrued, even from Google Earth perspective. And that's just what I'm trying to say is let's just be realistic about this, and let's hold off for the hard evidence. And until we get it, unfortunately, we just have to be a little skeptical about many of the claims that are coming out.
Yeah. Absolutely, and I think that's it's a very sobering sort of position, and I think it's important to have, because like you say, it's like if the information will come out, providing that we continue on the track of doing this properly and really having the the good researchers on it and taking the time to do it, and once that's there, it won't be a big conspiracy anymore, because guess what, the evidence will be there. So it's super important that that approach is taken. So I guess one of the final things with regards to Antarctica there is, giants. Has there been any evidence that you've heard of, or that you've seen, or any discussions you have of any form of recovered remains of giants in that particular region?
Well, that's very interesting you bring that up, because, of course, Corey Good speaks of the pre-Adamite giants, and I gave my talk last year was on the giants, and I would say that there is a lot of evidence that there are giants around the world, including very reputable video and photo evidence and testimony from archaeologists who have had their findings swooped up and taken away. This has been going on for not only decades, but centuries. Since many of the mound sites in North America were excavated, if they were to find giants, the Smithsonian would come in and confiscate the stuff. It's almost like the FBI and the scene. Oh, we'll take care of this now. You researchers and academics can go back to your universities.
Yeah.
We'll take care of this now. And then you'd never hear from it again. And there was a very famous case from Beloit College up at Lake Delavan, which is not far from where I grew up in the northwestern suburbs of Chicago. This happened in southern Wisconsin about 100 years ago. And it was a very well documented case. It was even on the cover of newspapers that you could look and read the old clippings, and Smithsonian came in, took it away, and denied they ever took a single thing. So it is one of those things that will show us that there had been many antediluvian civilizations as well as architecture. And that's the other thing about Antarctica, is there are some very intriguing images that are in 90-degree angles that look like step pyramids or possibly what could be a city grid. Things like that are very intriguing. And when you consider that East Antarctica is one of the oldest continents, land masses on Earth, the possibility that when it had been a more temperate climate, that there had been perhaps one of these antediluvian civilizations there is intriguing. And when you have a city or some kind of pyramid or structure that's highly advanced and built, you have obviously builders. So this kind of ties into the biblical narrative of the Nephilim or the Anunnaki, these human-like giants that were much, much bigger than us, that may have been the progenitor race, that were master genetic scientists that could have had a hand in the creation of the human race. So I'd say it is in the realm of possibility, but it would be in my speculative category of what could possibly be down there as well.
Right. And I guess one of the, for that area that's the no-fly zone, that particular spot, do you have any, from anything you've spoken to, like did you ask people down there, hey, why is there a no-fly zone? Or do you know what's there? Do you know what might be, what sort of responses did you get?
Well, that there is very sensitive equipment there, and they are. This is the South Pole base is called Amundsen Scott South Pole Station, and it is the third U.S. research station in Antarctica. And they do have some very sophisticated equipment that's buried under the ice. One of them is called the Ice Cube, and it does monitor the neutrinos, as well as they've recently detected cosmic rays that come out of the Earth. So there is very established science of some very weird things that are going on down there, that we could just talk about the scientific evidence that are even in many of the journals that would frown upon anything else but very established science, and see that there is some very strange things that are happening, especially at the South Pole region. Now, my colleague, Dr. Michael Sala, who I have immense respect for, he says maybe these cosmic rays are evidence that there's some kind of inner Earth. And that I would have to say is speculation, but it does beg the question, cosmic rays come from the outside, coming in all the time. What would create them coming out, as well as the neutrinos passing through the Earth faster than the speed of light? So there are things that are happening that really do raise the eyebrow when you look at the details of the studies.
When they show that image, oftentimes you see it sort of like whether it's just a still image or a graphic of cosmic rays and how it will sort of go in and create that toroid shape around the Earth. Do you think that it's possible that what they're seeing coming out is actually it sort of coming down and back around? Is that the kind of cosmic rays that could potentially be, or do they think it's cosmic rays that are not coming from outside of, that are actually coming from like somewhere, like are they able to measure them, for example, and say, hey, these aren't the same type of cosmic rays that are coming from, space, but are coming in a different way?
They are coming in a different way, and they're coming at a 30-degree angle, not quite straight up out of the South Pole, but kind of at an angle. And that's what Dr. Sala says is what he believes could be something from an inner Earth sort of scenario. And what you described, that toroidal field, that's also what creates the northern lights in the northern hemisphere, or the southern lights down in the southern hemisphere, which I found happen all the time. But during the Antarctic summer, it's just too light out. You can't see them. But they are happening all the time. So this is a phenomenon of the Earth, of the polar region, of these particles in the atmosphere that sometimes get lit up and appear to us as the aurora borealis.
Nice. Okay, cool. So I mean, I think from an Antarctic perspective, we got a pretty interesting handle. Is there anything else you want to add before I ask one final question?
Well, just to say that getting down there is very, very difficult. You have to pay the Drake tax, as they say, and cross the stormiest ocean channel in the world, and that's the Drake Passage between southern tip of South America and the northern tip of the Palmer Peninsula. It could either be the Drake Lake, and sometimes very calm, or the Drake Shake, and that's what we got. And the first hour getting into the Drake, 2/3 of our crew were throwing up. And we were on a 74-foot sailboat, and didn't take our Dramamine on time, and it didn't even help anymore. So I lost about 20 pounds on this trip. And everybody that's seen me like, wow, you look great. You lost a lot of weight. And I'm like, well, that just is what happens when you don't eat for 5 days. So I guess my final thought is that even if you take a cruise ship, 50% of people on a cruise ship will throw up from seasickness. It's a very rough sea. So you have to pay the price to go there. But once you get there, it's just otherworldly, and it was worth the suffering we had to go through. Fortunately, on the way back, the seas weren't as heavy. We took our Dramamine on time, and only 1 or 2 people threw up coming back.
Nice. Well, I mean, that's good to hear. Good little ending to that there. So one thing we've been sort of working on and doing here, again in the same fashion as what we discussed here with Antarctica, and bringing, let's bring the goods. Let's not just talk about the speculation is fine to talk about. There's nothing wrong with that, but let's see what goods there are. When it comes to the shadow government, the cabal, the elite, the Illuminati, all this sort of stuff, to us, it's really all about, people ask the question all the time. It's one of the big things that come up in the world of people that are open to some of these alternative ideas, but they're not quite there yet. It's like, who is they? Who is, when people just say the government, or when they say, oh, the shadow, does the deep state even exist, right? So in your perspective, because I know I was going through your book, and you have this section where you start getting into that. Who's the shadow government? Who's the deep state? To you?
Well, there has been a deep state pretty much refers to our own government, but there has been a shadow government that has existed within the different empires, pretty much all the way back to ancient Roman times, and even the pharaohs of Egypt. And an example I use is it's a control system. It controls the masses. The pharaohs of Egypt were considered living gods. They were human, but they were considered by the people to be gods. The Caesars of Rome were living gods. They were still men like you and me, but they preferred to be considered gods. And now you have a pope in Rome who has an earpiece to God. So you see, it's a way to say, hey, look, we're this priestly class, we're the Brahmins. It happens all around the world. It's not just religion, but now it's power. And this is what these very wealthy people seek more than anything else, is control and power, because they've already got the mega mansions and 20 Rolls Royces and planes to fly anywhere they want. What they want is to control humanity. And that's why the Great Awakening is so important, that we all pay attention to what's going on here. And by the way, they own the mass media. So do you think they're going to give themselves away? Of course not. And we've known since 1775, Adam Weishaupt was working for this group he called the Illuminati. Now, whether you want to call them that or they call themselves that is actually irrelevant. The point is, there is a control group. They do have the lion's share of resources, media control, and basically wish to control the narrative. And what's so amazing about this age that we live in, Joe, is that I can publish books and talk about it. You can do your videos, although we do live now in an age where there's censorship starting to rear its ugly head. But the point is, the alternative media is finally an opportunity for researchers like ourselves to understand their mode of operation and hopefully expose them, because that is the way humanity will be free. When we can really shake off the shackles of their control, coupled with the disclosure of a UFO ET reality, the exopolitics of humans joining this galactic family out there. And I do believe most ETs are of a benevolent nature and would love to welcome us in. But look, we still have starving people here. We still have destruction of this planet. We still have wars going on down here. So if you're a benevolent ET race watching Earth, this is like the planet of the apes down here. We're like a wild planet that's just tearing ourselves up. And I don't think they're ready for us to join them on the same kind of even ground of being a benevolent nation. So what we have to do is find peace. And we have to find peace within ourselves first. We have to find peace with the people around us. And then we have to find peace with the planet and the animals and really respect this living organism called Earth that we live on and all creatures and people within it. And then finally, maybe we'll have a chance to join this galactic brother and sisterhood that have been keeping an eye on us little planets down here, the apes on this planet.
Yeah. And it's one thing we talk about a lot, and we inject it within our media, is just this idea of a shift in consciousness, and that's kind of the underlying thing. There's this discussion of disclosure and how if we know the information, suddenly then everything's going to change. Like if we expose the deep state, the Illuminati, the shadow government, then it'll all change. But it doesn't seem like that's the full picture here. There's something deeper, and that's where we get into the consciousness, we get into the changing within and all that sort of stuff. To you, what does that look like to shift one's consciousness to get into those states of peace within yourself? Like, how would you recommend someone go about doing that?
Well, the Temple of Apollo at Delphi has two very profound words that are timeless through the ages, and it says, know thyself. And it really starts within. And if meditation works for you, if yoga practice works for you, if just thinking good thoughts is a practice where you can just wake up and say, I'm going to do something good for someone or myself, and just practice kindness. I love that bumper sticker of the Dalai Lama. He says, kindness is my religion. It's so simple sometimes to just be a good person and do good things in the world and try to help this fractured human race work itself out. Just be that one little node of light that's going to do good in the world. And if enough of us start to catch on to that, it's just going to be that 100th monkey effect, and it could really affect all of our consciousness, even the most remote people of the world. Now, keep in mind, we live in a world where we still have Stone Age primitive people in the Amazon and highlands of Papua New Guinea, and we have people in outer space and perhaps this breakaway civilization. So we're so stretched out. Who is humanity? From Stone Age primitive tribes to spacefaring humans and everybody in between. So we're going to have to find some commonality. We're going to have to find the fraternity of humankind to bring ourselves together. And I think throwing off the yoke of control from this elite group, and I can't even rule out that we haven't been influenced by malevolent ETs either. The Greys, the reptilians who may live underground, who may have control over some of these elites as well and are working towards the same goal of control agenda. This has to be understood as well. And sometimes truth is stranger than fiction, and we're just going to have to grapple with some some pretty big truths here. The alternative media is starting to tackle this, and it's good. But by far, the mass majority of people, this is going to be a real tough one to wrap their head around. But I think it's inevitable, and it will have to happen. And I really applaud you and Collective Evolution for doing what you guys do, because you're certainly helping shift that consciousness change.
Awesome. We appreciate that, and thank you so much for your work as well and everything that you're doing. You mentioned a little bit earlier, it's probably the last thing I want to ask you here, about 2020 being a big year, from almost, I think you referred to it as sort of like another Y2K in a sense, or 2012. Why is that for you? What do you see about 2020 that's so important?
Well, first of all, I was tipped off to the date several years ago by author Leo Lionsgamy, who I publish, and his book, Confessions of Illuminati, Volume 2, and he came out of many of these bloodline families and elite control groups, speaking firsthand on information he has gathered. But he, even in the subtitle of his book, is that it's all coming together in 2020, and that they have to make this whole New World Order plan come together by next year, or the whole thing will fabulously fall apart in such a spectacular way. And we're talking about giant institutions such as the Vatican could come crumbling down. In fact, we even published a book called The Last Pope, that there is even a prophecy all the way back to the Middle Ages of this this mystic named Malachy, who went through all the popes for hundreds of years to this very time. And this is the period when it all starts to really either come together for the one world government, one world currency, one world religion, or it all just falls apart spectacularly, and then humans become free. So Y2K was sort of the beginning of humanity waking up. 2012 through the Mayan calendar was more of this awareness of ourselves and our place on this planet with perhaps the galactic community, where 2020 is the period where we're going to see many of these age-old institutions come crashing down, and we're going to have the opportunity to redefine ourselves and maybe make this a peaceful planet once and for all. Mm-hmm. That's what I would love to see.
Yeah, I mean, you speak like how we enjoy speaking, where it almost feels definitive that, you know what, we're going to make this shift. We're going to bring this peace about, and these things are going to come crashing down. I almost sense that there's this deeper feeling. I mean, I know I have it, and I know some people that I speak to, have been able to relate to it as well. That it's almost like, we know that we're going to push through this change. We know that we're going to sort of dethrone this elite in a sense, and it's all part of a process anyway, right? And that it's really we're just kind of going through the processes. And so long as we don't just sit back and say, okay, yeah, it'll, but we actually take some action upon it, it appears as though it feels like we're going to push through it.
Yep. I really think so too. I'm very optimistic, and enough of us are already awakened. And what happens, Joe, is once you make that journey and you start to understand and you see the control grid, it's like a magician pulling the rabbit out of its sleeve. The first time you see it is like, wow, that's cool, that's magic. But when you learn the magician's trick, it's like, oh, that's how they do it. Sure, now I get it. Then there's no turning back. Once you're out of the box, you never go back in. And that's what's happening to a lot of people. And I think it's a wonderful thing to see. And we're finally receiving our sovereignty as humans on this planet and just saying, we demand that we don't abuse ourselves anymore, or the planet, or the animals, or each other. And we're very, very close. And that's why I think 2020 will be a very pivotal year.
Nice. Awesome. Well, I mean, thanks so much for your time and for your work, and your, having I guess the courage to go down to Antarctica to find that stuff, to try and, see what it is that, you could figure out and bring corroboration to. And I applaud the fact that, you feel that if you need to, you'll be the one to say, hey, you know what, the evidence is just not fully there yet. Let's wait on this, because I think that's a very important piece. And thanks for doing this with us here today. And I look forward to seeing more of your work upcoming, and hopefully catching you at CITD. Thinking about going
Sounds
down
great.
there.
Yeah, come on down. We'll get you media pass, and maybe we can do a follow-up interview there.
Yeah, would be great. Would be great. I didn't get to make it last year, but went the 2 previous years, and it was pretty. It's a good experience. It's fun.
Yeah, it should be a good one. Yep, and I'll be leading the charge on the Antarctica panel discussion, so that should be an interesting one because I've got a couple people and things to call out. So
Nice.
I want to talk to these people first, one-on-one, and just say, I can't go along with what you're saying on this, but we'll see how that goes.
Well, and that too, that there is a great aspect of this community that I think is really important. Is like, it almost feels like sometimes that people are afraid to talk to each other honestly. They'll go online, they'll say something, but they don't want to talk to each other honestly about what it is that, and then you get all these little riffs and little disagreements going on, and it's always just like, let's talk to each other. Let's be the shift that we're sharing with our audience. We got to be it within ourselves, So,
well said. Absolutely.
Key. Awesome. Okay, so obviously we see there's some interesting things that for sure happen, right? That we're able to see, we're able to kind of look at. There's a lot of questions that still remain, and this is what's fascinating to us. Like, our vision is you take whistleblower testimony, you take what people are claiming has happened, and you say, okay, how can we come together as a community and corroborate this information and do it in a way that becomes highly factual, that becomes investigative, so that we can actually put a very strong stake to the claims that are being made. It's a huge aspect, as we discussed in this particular interview, that goes on out there, that we need to be able to, we need to bring more high quality investigative journalism to this space of, UFO disclosure, alternative news, consciousness, all that sort of stuff. It's easy to make claims, but we need to take the same resources, the same efforts to actually start really making a solid story out of this stuff so it can be presented and taken a lot more serious in the mainstream. The reality of the situation is your subscription to CETV is helping to do that, right? Because we're able to start, diving deeper in an investigation and bringing the resources together to make it happen, interview people like Brad and others that we're going to find out there that are going to be able to help us sort of put the pieces together of this story that's unfolding. Because the reality of the situation is, we've been 10 years in this whole space, and it's way too easy for mainstream individuals or for other people that are trying, they're on the fence wanting to learn more about this information, but not everybody's ready to go just based off of intuition, just based off of a feeling of somebody. Some people are like, hey, I'm still in a mode where I need to see it for myself. I need to see what's happening. So the more we can actually build that up properly and do these investigations properly, much like we've seen happen within the vaccine space, where that's a big discussion, that's a big topic, because there's been such high quality journalism and high quality research done that is poking holes in all of the mainstream stories. So it's the same for this stuff. So, like Brad mentioned in the whole thing, I'm just going to reiterate the idea that it's, let's calm things down a bit. Let's not pretend that all of these things are fully factual, and let's present this stuff as here's the alleged case, here's what might be going on, here's what might be happening. Let's feed our curiosity, but let's explore things from a very grounded level. We think that's very, very important in this entire process. Hope you enjoyed this interview, and we'll catch you in the next one.